Chapter 21 The Professor's Proposal. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Just now in the water tank, Gabriella and Isa witnessed the battle outside through the surveillance, and had a clearer understanding of the fighting power of Wolverine and George, and the professor said something to them. According to the professor, it is almost impossible to rush to New York in just 6 days to find news about Tony Stark and go to the Middle East for rescue, even if it is really completed. It is also full of dangers. This is actually taking risks with the lives of Wolverine and George. Moreover, the knowledgeable professor does not recommend that the children go to Canada and let the Canadian government arrange their future lives, so after careful thinking and discussion, they decided to completely abandon the previous cooperation with the Canadian government, no longer go to the North Dakota border, but find a safe place to settle down first, then plan how to rescue Tony Stark. Even if this plan fails in the end, as long as they work together, they can defeat those people in the experimental base who felt impossible to defeat before, and live with the children. This time, the opponent came with such a large lineup, but they were beaten and fled in embarrassment. In the past, they thought it was impossible for them to fight against the powerful Acre Gene Company alone, but now it seems that it is not impossible. As expected of Professor X, even if his abilities cannot be used, his ability to persuade people with his mouth is really incomparable to ordinary people. George's eyes lit up when he heard Gabriella's answer. He naturally agreed with Gabriella's decision to rescue Tony Stark in 6 days. Although he had the advantage of the plot, it was not as easy as the professor said. In New York, the forces are complicated, and who can guarantee that everything will go smoothly? If there is enough time to prepare, his ability development can be improved to a higher level. He can deflect sniper bullets, or learn a few more magic in Hogwarts, then the success rate will naturally be greatly improved. The key is that if he remembers correctly, Tony Stark told Pepper in the car in the movie that he was locked in the cave for more than 3 months, so normally, they don't need to be so anxious. Or if he becomes strong enough in the past few months and can get a sum of money to buy shares of Stark Group, then it seems unimportant whether to save Tony Stark or not. He saved Tony Stark for money, so that Tony Stark can protect them and live a normal life, but if they are strong enough and have money, there is no need to find Tony Stark. Because finding Tony Stark for cooperation will inevitably attract the attention of S.H.I.E.L.D., and being noticed by S.H.I.E.L.D. means being noticed by Hydra, which will lead to greater trouble. 6 days is indeed tight. Since you have made a decision, let's leave here first, find a safe place, and then discuss what to do next. George nodded to Gabriella, and then led everyone to collect the submachine guns and grenades on the bodies, and then quickly left the abandoned factory. In the current situation, as long as they leave the border now and go to a slightly farther place, it will be difficult for the people in the experimental base to reorganize their manpower to find them. Ackley Genetics can retrieve the surveillance of this small border town because it is chaotic enough here, and many things can be solved with money, but they are not regular national organizations such as S.H.I.E.L.D., FBI, and CIA. On the surface, they are just businessmen, and it is impossible for their influence to spread throughout the United States, otherwise they would have been eliminated long ago. In the movie, if Donald had not used Caliban's tracking ability, it would not be so easy to find Wolverine and the Professor, and now that X-24 has been killed, before creating a new replica, it is estimated that the other party will not come to hunt them again, and they can't beat them at all, so if nothing unexpected happens, after this war, there should be no movement at the experimental base in a few months, and they can plan the next step with peace of mind. On the highway, Isa was driving a large truck in front, and George, Gabriella, Wolverine, Caliban and Professor X sat in the shed behind with the children, discussing their next destination. After a discussion, several people summarized the following points. First, the place where they are going to stay next cannot be in the city center, which will easily expose their whereabouts and attract the attention of the government and Ackley Genetics. Second, they can't stay in a place that is too remote, because whether it's the education of these children, the medicine needed by the professor, or their lives, they can't be satisfied in a too remote place. Also, it's hard to get money in a too remote place. If you don't take the route of rescuing Tony Stark, you have to get money to buy Stark shares. How to get money quickly? Normal methods will definitely not work. The so-called gold belt for murder and arson is naturally robbed from others, such as those businessmen and gangs who violate the law. there are few people in 2 remote places, let alone rich people, so naturally you can't get any money. Third, you can't be too far away from New York. On the one hand, they still need to continue to pay attention to Tony Stark's news trends and be ready to rescue plans at any time when they have news. On the other hand, George himself has another reason, that New York is a concentration of major events, especially in a few years, there will be an invasion of the Chitauri, he must be nearby for easy observation. If nothing happened, he would not have to participate. If something unexpected happened, he would have to prepare early, otherwise, if he was practicing magic and the whole earth was destroyed, he would not be able to survive. In fact, we can go back to school, back to Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. After summarizing, Professor X suddenly said, however, Wolverine's face changed when he heard it, and he immediately rejected it. No, it's too dangerous. The government is still looking for you. Going back to school is like walking into a trap. In fact, he was not worried about the government's wanted, after all, that happened 25 years ago. They have not appeared in 25 years. The leaders of the government are probably going to change several times. The current person in charge should have thought they were dead a long time ago. What he was worried about was that when he returned to New York and returned to school, the professor would remember those deliberately sealed memories and remember that he killed all the mutants in the school. Professor X's eyes instantly shed 2 lines of tears when he heard this. Logan, you know, when you just fought, I remembered everything that happened, with the crimes I committed. I should have been dead long ago, but now, I want to live, not for myself, but for these children. I want to recover my abilities, protect the hopes of these mutants, and make up for the crimes I committed back then. At this point, Professor X choked up and continued. The brainwave room made by the beast in the basement of the school, after closing it, activate the special switch, which can close my brainwaves, so that if there is an accident and it goes out of control again, the same tragedy will not happen again. Chapter 22 Xavier School for Geniuses. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Professor, you can't be blamed for this. You didn't do it on purpose, just like what you told us, it also applies to you. Wolverine sighed and comforted him. Back then, the reason why mutants were feared by humans was that a small number of them used their abilities to commit crimes. Most of the time, it was because when mutants began to show their abilities, they were unable to control their abilities due to their inner fear, which led to the involvement of their relatives, friends, and innocent people around them. Every time these mutant children were taken to school, the professor would give them psychological counseling so that they could muster up the courage to live again. In fact, the professor was just like those children. Because of epilepsy, his brain lost control, and such a tragedy happened. He felt more pain than anyone else. I'm not a child. Since I made a mistake, I have to bear it. I can't make up for the dead, I can only find a way to make the living live better. The professor looked at the group of children in front of him and smiled again. If he hadn't seen these children and had hope in his heart, he would probably never be able to face his painful memories and would have been in a daze until his death. But Professor, so many years have passed, the school may have been taken away by the government a long time ago. At this time, George spoke up. The location of Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters is indeed good. It is located in the suburbs of the Bronx, New York. It is not too remote, but it is also a distance away from Manhattan, where many incidents occur. Even if the Chitauri invade, it will not spread there. The most important thing is that, according to his understanding, the Bronx is the most chaotic district in New York, which is located in the northernmost part of New York. It is mainly inhabited by African and Latin American descendants. If Hell's Kitchen is the most chaotic place in Manhattan, a wealthy area, then the Bronx is the most chaotic place in New York. There are all kinds of gangs, and the crime rate is one of the highest in the United States. Such a place is just right for him to make money in troubled waters. Even if he kills someone, it will not attract the attention of the government. However, after so many years, how could such a big castle still be empty? Professor X wiped his tears and explained. Although I am wanted, it is not an open one. The government does not want to make a big deal out of it, and there is not enough evidence to arrest me, so my identity is still there, and most of my assets are still there, including the castle. It's just that I can't show up, and I can't use any assets, otherwise the government can follow those clues to find and arrest me. I see. George is not clear about this, but after Professor X's explanation, he can roughly understand it. Professor X's identity is secretly the principal of the mutant school, but in public he is the heir of the famous Xavier family, a real big capitalist. If you say it, it is more influential than the Stark Group in some aspects. The rise of the Stark Group is mainly due to Tony's father Howard, who was not actually a big group before, but the Xavier family is a noble family with a long history. With a long inheritance and deep roots, without solid evidence, arresting the heir of the Xavier family and confiscating all the property of the Xavier family will make all the old capitalists feel a sense of crisis, because you can raid the Xavier family without evidence today, and you can find a reason to raid them tomorrow, and everyone will be in danger. And can the government produce solid evidence that the professor killed people? Of course not. The professor has epilepsy and his brain is out of control. He directly killed the people around him with mental power. Even in the surveillance, everyone suddenly collapsed and died. There is no way to prove that it was the professor who killed them. On the other hand, we have to consider the negative impact. If it is confirmed that the professor who helped the government deal with crises many times before and was received and awarded by the president many times killed so many people at once, then the government will also be responsible, and its influence will decline, and even the president will be greatly affected. So at that time, they could only arrest and detain secretly, and could not put it in the open, and even the whole incident was deliberately downplayed. If so, it's really a good choice. George thought carefully and approved Professor X's proposal. The Westchester incident happened 25 years ago, in 1984, when Tony Stark was only 15 years old and had just entered the undergraduate program of the Department of Electrical Engineering at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Captain Marvel Carol Danvers had not yet become a pilot. Nick Fury was just an ordinary S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, and Star-Lord Peter Quill was only 6 years old and his mother was still alive, so perhaps no one really cared about the mutant school being empty there. It is estimated that the police sent by the government to search at that time could not even find the basement under the school. I have no objection, as long as the children are safe. Gabriella also raised her hand in agreement. He thought that since the professor and George thought it was feasible, there should be no problem. She was just a Mexican nurse with shallow knowledge. What she had to do was to take good care of the children, not to express her opinions randomly. She knew her position very well. Seeing that everyone agreed, Wolverine no longer objected. In fact, he wanted to go to the school again, because it was his spiritual harbor. As for Caliban, he went wherever the professor and Wolverine were, not caring about the specific place, so the truck changed direction and drove all the way to New York. Because there were too many children and none of them had identities, they did not go into the city along the way, but just bought supplies in some small towns along the way, and drove to remote places to rest when they were tired. After 2 days, they finally arrived in the Bronx in northern New York. Perhaps because he faced himself, the professor's condition improved a little. Although he could not use his abilities as before, it was no problem to occasionally affect the thinking of ordinary people. This also made their journey much smoother. During the period, in order to prevent being tracked, they also changed trucks many times, sell the truck to a second-hand market, and then go to another second-hand market to buy a different model of second-hand truck with a little money, and keep switching. After arriving in the Bronx, they did not go directly to the school, where the professor's 4 garden castles were transformed, but George and Wolverine disguised themselves and went to find out the bottom first. The situation was indeed as the professor expected. It had been empty and unoccupied. It was just that the castle had been uninhabited for a long time and looked much more dilapidated. After making sure that the school was safe, they took the children and quietly entered the school at night and lived in the basement of the castle. The basement of the castle had 2 floors. In addition to the professor's brainwave amplification room and the former X-Men training room, there were more than a dozen vacant rooms. Everyone could make do and live there. Chapter 23: X-Fighter and Modified Motorcycle. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. There are still planes. George was stunned when he saw the X-Fighter in front of him. He didn't expect that the X-Fighter was still in the school basement. He thought it had been driven away by Wolverine and Professor X when they were escaping. Wolverine took off his suit and shirt, changed back to his favorite jacket, and explained to George with a cigar in his mouth. It's a pity that I can't fly a plane, otherwise I wouldn't have been so embarrassed when I took the professor to escape. At that time, the professor's brain went out of control and killed all the mutants in the school. In order to save the professor, he drove the professor directly to the hospital. Although the professor's condition eased later, they were also arrested by a large number of agents sent by the FBI. If he could fly a plane at the time, he could take the professor out of the United States directly and go to other countries to treat the professor, and he could also escape the government's wanted list. It's good to have it. It will be useful in the future. At this time, George remembered that Wolverine not only couldn't fly a plane, but also seemed to be a little afraid of heights and airsick. In the movie, it is usually the Beast, Mystique, Storm, Cyclops and Phoenix who take turns to fly the X-Fighter, but this is not a bad thing. Although this X-Fighter is a fighter from more than 20 years ago, it is not much worse than the most advanced Quinjet of S.H.I.E.L.D. because it was modified by Beast, a highly intelligent scientist. Not only is it fast, it can also be invisible and shielded from satellite reconnaissance. In the future, as long as one of them learns to fly an airplane, they can rely on this X-Fighter to evacuate everyone in time when they encounter any danger. For example, the Chitauri invasion of New York was not effectively stopped. By the way, you can ride this motorcycle when you go to the city to investigate intelligence in the future. It is Scott's favorite. After special modification, it is 3 times faster than the fastest motorcycle in the world. After visiting the X-Fighter, Wolverine took George to find a normal-looking motorcycle in the basement. Wolverine, the professor, and Caliban are too conspicuous and cannot appear in the city often, otherwise they will inevitably be discovered by the government. They can only help at critical moments, so the task of going to the Stark Group in Manhattan to find out information about Tony Stark will depend on George himself. It seems that Scott has good vision. George took a test ride on the motorcycle and showed a satisfied look on his face. Since the journey was smooth and the Mutant Academy was better than he expected, he no longer planned to contact Tony Stark so quickly and expose himself to forces such as S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra, so naturally, he didn't need to go to Manhattan to get intelligence. And he didn't need to kidnap Obadiah to torture Tony Stark's location in the Middle East. However, he still needed to use this motorcycle to go to the downtown area of the Bronx to get information about local gangs and bad businessmen, because he planned to go to the downtown area of the Bronx to make a big deal before Tony Stark escaped. At present, his own plan is to study magic hard in the first 3 months. After 3 months, he will clean up all the rich and powerful gangs in the entire Bronx, get a lot of money, and buy crazily when the Stark Group stocks are at their lowest, then sell them all after Tony Stark comes back and the Stark Group stocks rise. When Tony Stark announced the closure of the weapons department of the Stark Group and stopped selling weapons, he would buy them crazily again, so that he could instantly have a large amount of wealth, so that he and the children in the school would not have to worry about money. Of course, this kind of thing can only be done once. If he goes to clean up the gangs every day, it will inevitably attract the attention of Kingpin, the ruler of the underground world, and other forces. If you walk by the river, you will get your shoes wet. If you do it too much, he and the mutant school may be exposed, but if you only do one deal, run away after it is done, and never show your head again. In the Bronx where there are few cameras, even Sherlock Holmes can't find him, so this deal must be a big deal, and you must scout the place in advance to collect intelligence. He has a good eye, especially when it comes to women. I used to hate that guy, but now I miss him a little. Wolverine looked at the motorcycle and couldn't help but fall into memories. George immediately understood when he heard it. He knew that Cyclops and Wolverine both liked Phoenix, but Phoenix finally chose Cyclops. By the way, we will definitely use electricity when we use these facilities in the basement. Will it attract the attention of the government? Or we should buy some generators. Although the power is not that sufficient, it is much safer. 25 years have passed. The government has probably forgotten about the castle here, and will not keep an eye on the castle's electricity consumption. However, he thinks that it is better to be cautious in everything. It is rare to find such a good retreat. If it is exposed, we have to find it again. After he learns the Muggle shielding spell, he will not have to be so cautious. Even if the school is reopened, he will not have to worry about being discovered by the government. You can rest assured about this. The electricity consumption of the two basements has been specially modified because of a special accident before. The beast has added a special power supply system, which is different from the power supply above the castle. It has also carried out a lot of defense upgrades. Even if the facilities are fully opened, no traces of electricity will be found. Wolverine waved his hand at George's reminder. That's good. Special accident? Is it the invasion of Apocalypse, or William Stryker leading his troops to attack the college? George didn't ask about this in detail. Anyway, it didn't matter which one it was. What mattered was that he knew it was safe here and he could study magic with peace of mind. I will take time to go outside to gather intelligence during this period. If possible, I think you and the professor can help guide these children and learn how to use their abilities to fight better. Finally, George also made a suggestion to Wolverine. Since the battle simulation room in the basement can be used normally, it can be used to train the children to use their abilities to fight. Unlike the rough training of the laymen in the experimental base, the real experts like the professor and Wolverine can better develop the potential of the children. He didn't ask these children to play most of the roles in the battle in a short time. At least it would be good to be able to protect themselves and not become a burden. Baker Gene Company will never let them go like this. It will be a matter of time before they find them based on the traces. At that time, it may not only be the copy of Wolverine, but also the copy of the Professor, Magneto and Cyclops. Of course, George believed that the strength of those copies must be very different from the original, because except for some special types, many mutants' abilities need to be developed and comprehended in order to exert stronger power. Just like Magneto, he was not that strong when he first appeared, and it was Professor X who developed and guided him to become stronger later. The clones made by Sandor Rice have an IQ similar to that of a child, and their actions are basically all remotely controlled. How could they develop their abilities? Major William Stryker in the movie used Wade as his main body and integrated so many mutant abilities, but he was still beheaded by Wolverine and Sabretooth. Facts have proved that unless the mind control is released, the clones cannot grow beyond the main body and can only become miscellaneous soldiers. It's just that too many miscellaneous soldiers are also a headache. Chapter 24 Heading to King's Cross Station. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Actually, if you don't tell me, I also have such a plan. If it were before, the professor would not have agreed with the children being exposed to fighting so early, but now, he must be very willing to allow these children to have more ability to protect themselves. Wolverine agreed with little hesitation. In the former mutant school, Professor. It is up to you to decide what kind of job you want to do in the future and what kind of person you want to be. Only if you really want to stay in school and become an X-Men as an adult, you will be trained in combat. However, the situation is obviously very different now. In order to survive better, even children must learn to develop their own abilities and learn to fight and protect themselves. If every child could have the strength of Little Wolf Girl, together they would not be afraid of being hunted down by the Achilles Gene Company. Okay, then have a good rest. After George and Wolverine inspected the entire two-story basement, they each returned to their rooms to rest. They have been rushing for the past 2 days and have not had a good rest. Now they can finally fall back and sleep peacefully. Just like that, 4 days later, as usual, George went to the Bronx to collect intelligence. When he came back, he immersed himself in studying magic. At night, he focused mainly on his own clone in the Harry Potter world. While the main body of the Marvel world was busy escaping from prison, the clones were not idle either. Except for the occasional reception of Tonks and her colleagues, they were basically studying magic theories and learning to practice new magic. But today is an exception, because today is September 1st, the day he is leaving to go to Hogwarts. Peppa, let's go. After placing the cage containing the giant owl, George locked the door of the shop, pushed the cart filled with luggage, and walked out of Nocturne Alley. Paige is the name he gave to his pet owl, because this owl is super edible. If he hadn't inherited the legacy of the old wizard, he wouldn't have been able to keep such a big pet, but if you can eat it, you can eat it, and it is indeed very useful. In order to prevent the store from being visited by dark wizards while he was in school, he had discounted all the potions and herbs in the store that he could not use in the past few days. It's just that few of the wizards who come to his store to buy things are easy to deal with. If he hadn't seen Peppa Pig, a giant owl, standing on the beam of the shop and staring eagerly, he might have made some small moves. For example, he used a confusion spell to make him confused and gave away expensive potions for nothing. Pushing a cart that was taller than himself, George walked out of Nocturne Alley, then turned into Diagon Alley. After about a few hundred meters, he came to a seemingly ordinary red brick wall. He took out his wand and tapped on a few specific bricks on the wall. The bricks on the wall immediately began to shake, and soon a wide archway appeared in front of him. Continuing to push the cart through the archway, he entered the famous Leaky Cauldron in Diagon Alley, a wizard hotel-style bar that integrated food and accommodation. He had eaten here several times when he was free. To be honest, the taste was average, the environment was average, and even a little dirty and cramped. After extending his hand to say hello to the boss, Old Tom, George did not stop at the Leaky Cauldron, but went directly to the Muggle Street outside the bar, and then stood quietly on the roadside and waited. Originally, he planned to take the Muggle subway to King's Cross Station, but the last time Tonks took his colleagues to eat at his place, they knew that he was going to King's Cross Station today and had to drive over to see him off. After waiting on the roadside for about 10 minutes, an old-fashioned dark green car drove over from a distance and parked next to him. "Hey, George, you're 10 minutes early." Tonks opened the door and got out of the passenger seat. George smiled and replied, "I'm used to doing everything a little early so I don't have to rush. This is a good habit, but it's a pity that I haven't been able to develop it." Tonks laughed and helped George move the luggage into the trunk of the car. She had a carefree personality and was very fast-paced in her work. Invisible stretching charm. Seeing Tonks put a lot of her luggage and Peppa Pig into the small trunk easily, George had a look of surprise on his face. The Traceless Extension spell is a magical spell that can expand the area of space. A wizard who is proficient in this spell can even expand a small box to the size of a city. Just like the famous magical zoologist Newt Scamander, he made such a large suitcase by himself. However, according to wizarding laws, wizards are not allowed to use this spell for private use, and can only be used on public items approved by the Ministry of Magic. For example, during the International Quidditch Tournament, magic tents were rented to wizard audiences from various countries, of course. Saying that, because this spell is too convenient in life, most wizards will still use it secretly. As long as they are not caught by Aurors, it doesn't matter much. It seems that you have been studying very carefully recently. This trunk has indeed been used with the Traceless Extension charm. But don't worry, this is a special Auror vehicle of the Ministry of Magic, and it is a legal modification. Tonks closed the trunk and winked triumphantly at George. She is still a trainee Auror, but due to her outstanding performance, she can already use the Ministry of Magic's Auror-specific magic car. Excellent. George gave a thumbs up. On the surface, Tonks is 19 years old and George is 11 years old. Tonks is a big sister, but in fact, Tonks's mental age is 19 years old, while George's mental age is already in his 30s, much more mature than Tonks. "Good morning, George." After getting in the car, a young male wizard wearing a bright green velvet suit sitting in the driver's seat waved and greeted him. "Hey, if you go to Hogwarts to study, we won't have free meals in the future." "Good morning, Aldo, you can wait for my vacation, which will only take a few months." George smiled and replied, he knew this guy. He and Tonks had come to eat a few times. He was very obsessed with the Chinese food he made. He was a classmate who graduated at the same time as Tonks and is now a trainee Auror in the Ministry of Magic, and he could see that this guy was pursuing Tonks. But Tonks only regarded him as a brother. It can only be said that love cannot be forced. Tonks likes uncle types like Lupin, and is not interested in handsome young men like Lardo. Don't listen to his nonsense, go to Hogwarts and study magic well, it is really a very good school. Tonks sat in the passenger seat and hit Lardo on the back of the head, then turned to Xiao Ji and said. Lardo touched the back of his head, and was used to it. He skillfully started the magic car and drove towards King's Cross Station. Chapter 25 Hogwarts Express. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Magic alchemy, I must study it carefully in the future. In less than 20 minutes, the magic car stopped outside King's Cross Station. George refused Tonks's kindness to send him in, while pushing the cart and thinking to himself, in fact, the road from the leaky cauldron to King's Cross Station just now was not so smooth, just in time for the traffic jam, but the car of the Ministry of Magic obviously also added high-level space magic with alchemy. Aldo just pressed a button, and the car was like compressed, easily passing through the gaps between the cars that were less than one person wide. The spells in this world are very magical, and all kinds of magic items made by alchemy are also very magical. After learning magic alchemy well, he can completely transform the mutant school into a magical castle similar to Hogwarts in the future. Ordinary people can't break in without his permission. 9 3/4 station. Coming to the partition wall between the 9th and 10th platforms, George pushed the cart straight into it. Then, something magical happened. He and the cart seemed to hit a transparent water curtain and pass through it without any hindrance. The scene changed, and a very special platform appeared in front of him. The most conspicuous one was the crimson steam locomotive, on which it was written, Hogwarts Express, departing at 11 o'clock. He had seen the introduction of this magical magic train in a special magic history book before. If you want to have a deep understanding of the magic of this world and be able to live in the wizarding world in the future, mastering the knowledge of magic history is also a top priority. Many methods of learning and cracking magic can actually be seen in the history of magic. So he would spend a certain amount of time every day to study the various history books he bought. The Hogwarts Express was built in the early and middle 19th century by a Muggle engineer, a large number of Muggle railwaymen, and most of the wizards in the Ministry of Magic at that time. This magic train route also used the world's largest number of forgetfulness spells and the largest scale of Muggle expulsion spells. The reason was that the then very responsible Minister of Magic, Ottolan Gamble, felt that it was too unsafe and uncomfortable for young wizards to use portkeys to go to Hogwarts. Every year, young wizards were lost due to improper use of portkeys. Inspired by the Muggle steam train, the Hogwarts Express and the super-long railway route were created. It is said that this move was protested by some pureblood families, but was strongly suppressed by the Minister of Magic on the grounds that they would not be admitted to Hogwarts if they did not take the train. This magic steam train travels between platform 9 3/4 of King's Cross Station in London and Hogsmeade Station, a total of 6 times a year. School starts once on September 1st, 4 times at Christmas and Easter, and once in June. At this time, the thick smoke of the steam engine filled the sky above the platform. Because George came early, there were not many young wizards and wizard parents on the platform, and it was not noisy. He pushed the cart into the carriage marked for the first grade, found a compartment at random, stuffed his luggage neatly onto the upper shelf, and then placed the cage containing the owl in the corner of the compartment next to him. Sleep well, don't scream and scare the little wizards who will come later. After telling Paige, George took out a book on the importance of basic magic theory and began to read it attentively. It takes about 5 or 6 hours to get from London to Hogwarts, so it can't be wasted. As time went by, there were more and more wizards on the platform outside the window, as well as various magical pets, and little wizards gradually entered the carriage. Wow, is this your pet? What a big owl. A little boy with a magic camera hanging around his neck was attracted by the huge owl. Page when he was pushing his cart past the compartment where George was, and walked in involuntarily. He put his luggage in the corner, picked up his magic camera and took a few pictures excitedly, then introduced himself to George. Hello, my name is Colin Creevy. Just call me George. George looked up at the boy and nodded with a smile. He was somewhat familiar with this name. It seemed that he was a crazy fan of Harry and liked to take pictures of his idol Harry the most. George, Colin was very lively and talkative. He sat next to George very familiarly and started chattering. At this time, George had to put away the magic book and chat with him for a few words. Through the chat, I learned that Colin was born in a Muggle family and had a younger brother, Dennis Creevy, because he was particularly fond of photography. After seeing the magic camera in Diagon Alley, he bought a magic camera with the money for buying a pet. The idol he admired most was Harry Potter, who was mentioned in a history of modern magic, the rise and fall of black magic and important magic events in the 20th century. He was only 1 year older than him, but he defeated Voldemort, who frightened the wizarding world. By the way, George, I've said so much, but you haven't told me about yourself yet. After a long chat, Colin realized that he didn't know George at all. In order not to continue talking, George smiled and said, "I am an orphan, I have never seen my parents, and I have no family, so there is nothing to introduce." Colin was stunned when he heard this, and then a sympathetic look appeared on his face, and he quickly changed the subject. "By the way, your owl is so big, what does it usually eat?" European owls usually appear in Europe, Asia and Africa, and mainly inhabit mountain forests, plains, wilderness, forest-edge shrubs, sparse forests, and exposed mountains and cliffs. It likes to eat farm rats, hares and pheasants, and sometimes frogs, snakes and lizards. It is said that it is one of the rare owl species that is not afraid of the gaze of the basilisk, and the other is the legendary phoenix. At this time, a somewhat trance-like voice suddenly sounded at the door of the box. George and Colin turned around to look. It was a little girl with silver eyes and dark golden-brown hair. Her skin was very fair and her eyes were big, but her eyes were not focused, therefore, the overall temperament seems a bit erratic and strange. The eagle owl is not afraid of the gaze of the basilisk. I don't seem to see any relevant introduction in the book. George asked, looking at the girl in surprise. Since he bought an eagle owl as a pet, how could he not look for relevant information, and he had read most of the information the girl just mentioned in the information, except for the last one. However, whether this last one is true is quite important, because there will indeed be a basilisk in Hogwarts this year, and it is a 1,000-year-old basilisk. So he had to verify it carefully. Chapter 26. George, Luna, Colin and Ginny. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The history of basilisks is too long and has long been banned by the Ministry of Magic. So few books mention this, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Like the scimitar-horned Snorlax, wizards do not believe this magical animal exists, but my father was lucky enough to see it once in Sweden. The girl tilted her head and replied, "What is a Snorlax?" Colin's face was full of curiosity. The girl explained, "It's a magical animal with special horns, but it can't fly." Okay, that should be the poison-horned beast. By this time George already knew the identity of the girl, Luna Lovegood. Her father was Xenophilius Lovegood, the editor-in-chief of the Quibbler magazine, and her mother was Pandora Lovegood, who died accidentally when she was 9 years old while experimenting with spells. It can be seen that without sufficient theoretical foundation of magic, creating new spells is also a very dangerous thing, because his family was well educated. What Luna said about the eagle owl might be true, but about the Sereno-horned Snorlax, he knew that Xenophilius had made it up to comfort his daughter. The so-called curved-horned snorkel is actually a poison-horned beast, and its special horn is also in danger of exploding. There are still seats here. Let me help you put your luggage on the rack. Because he wanted to learn more knowledge from Luna that was not in the books, George took the initiative to get up and help her move the luggage on the cart to the shelf above. "Thank you, my name is Luna Lovegood." Luna was also very interested in the eagle owl, so she did not refuse, but she couldn't help but let out a sigh when she saw the thin and frail George lifting her luggage to the high shelf very easily. "You are so strong." After Luna sat down, the three chatted again, but mainly Colin, who was as curious as a baby, was asking, Luna was answering, and George was listening quietly. He would only ask questions when he encountered knowledge that interested him. Woo! The long whistle sounded and the train was about to leave. At this time, the sliding door of the box was suddenly opened, and a girl with thick, fiery red hair, bright brown eyes, and a face as delicate and cute as a doll walked in. "Is there anyone here?" she asked, pointing to the seat next to Luna. "Everywhere else is full." "No, you can sit next to me." Luna smiled softly. The girl was visibly relieved when she heard this, because her brothers were the last to board the train. She certainly wouldn't admit that she almost forgot the magical notebook. "Little Ginny, we're here to help you." At this time, a pair of identical red-haired twin boys walked in. They happily helped their sister pack her luggage, and then left in a noisy manner when her sister was driven away by her disgust. "Hello everyone, my name is Ginny, Ginny Weasley." After driving away the two troublesome brothers, Ginny sat next to Luna and introduced herself generously. She was not a shy person, except in front of Harry. Luna Lovegood. Colin Creevy. George. The three of them also introduced themselves. George, you have the same name as my brother, one of the two just now. He is also called George, George Weasley. By the way, what's your last name? Just call me George. George smiled and didn't explain much. Although his pronunciation of George and George Weasley's George are the same, there are essential differences. George Weasley's surname is Weasley and his first name is George, but his surname is actually Joe, and his first name is G, which means governing. His father hoped that he could become an official and govern a country in the future, so he took this name. So actually, according to the name here, he should be called George Chiao. It's just that he thought it sounded too awkward, so when he told people, he just called him George. Ginny, how many brothers do you have in your family? But at this time, the kind-hearted Colin suddenly changed the topic. He felt that George, as an orphan, probably didn't want people to know his last name. Ginny didn't think much, stretched out her hands and bent 4 fingers. 6. Bill is a curse-breaker in Gringotts, Egypt, Charlie is a dragon tamer in Romania, Percy is in 6th grade, George and Fred are in 4th grade, you just watched, Ron. So much. Hearing Ginny's answer, both Colin and Luna looked surprised. There were so many children, not to mention wizarding families, even Muggle families were rare. Listening to the 3 people's chat, George moved his eyes away from Ginny's suitcase and sighed in his heart. If all wizarding families could be as fertile as the Weasley family, wizards would probably rule the world long ago, and Muggles would have nothing to worry about. While the 4 of them were chatting, the train also started to move out of King's Cross Station, speeding along the fields. Full of cattle and sheep, heading towards Scotland quickly. It was the first time for them to travel away from home, and they went to the famous Hogwarts. Even the quietest Luna was actually a little excited, so the 3 of them never stopped chatting, because much of what the 3 chatted about later had nothing to do with magic, but their respective childhood experiences and family situations. George gradually withdrew from the chat and began to read a book. Around 12:30, a smiling and dimpled Miko opened the box door and asked, "Dear children, would you like to buy some food for the car? There are BB's multi-flavored beans, bubble super bubble gum, chocolate frogs, pumpkin pie, crucible-shaped cakes, and licorice wands." Facing the small cart of magic snacks and the witch's question, the 3 of them shook their heads at the same time. Colin was born into a Muggle family and naturally didn't have much money. All his remaining money was spent on magic cameras. Although Ginny was born into a pure-blood family, her father had long been expelled from the family for being close to Muggles and loving Muggle items. All the family's expenses came from her father's salary from the Ministry of Magic. With so many children going to school, and the defense against the dark arts textbooks for several of her brothers this year being particularly expensive, even many of her school supplies were secondhand, so how could she get any pocket money to buy snacks? As for Luna, she is not short of pocket money, but she doesn't seem to like snacks much. One of each, thank you. George knew the situation of several young wizards, so he got up and spent 12 silver sickles and 5 bronze nuts, ordered a portion of all the snacks, and placed them on the table. "Ginny, I heard you just said that you know a poisonous spell called the Bat Charm. I wonder if you can teach it to me when you have time." He pushed a quarter of the snacks in front of Ginny, and Ginny nodded with bright eyes. "Of course, no problem. That's my best spell. Even George and Fred have fallen victim to it. Luna, I would like to ask you some knowledge about magical animals." George pushed another quarter of the snack in front of Luna. Luna smiled and nodded, but did not refuse. Finally, George put aside his share and pushed the remaining quarter towards Colin. "Do you have time to take a magic photo for me? I want to keep it as a souvenir." Chapter 27. To be honest, you look like my dad. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The train will arrive at Hogwarts in 5 minutes. Please leave your luggage on the train and we will take you to school. Night had fallen outside the window, and there were mountains and woods under the deep purple sky. The speed of the train gradually slowed down, and a loud reminder suddenly appeared in the passage of the carriage. "It's time for us to change into our school uniforms." George took off his coat and put on his black Hogwarts wizard robes. Luna, Ginny and Colin also reacted and quickly changed into their school uniforms. After the train stopped, the little wizards swarmed out, pushing and shoving in the aisles, fearing that they would miss something if they took a step too slow. Some of the little wizards' faces were so squeezed that they were distorted. "Don't worry," not seeing this situation, George decisively stopped Ginny and the three others who were trying to squeeze in from behind. "We have already arrived at the station, and there is no way to escape from a castle as big as Hogwarts, so there is no need to panic and squeeze out." Unlike other little wizards, he was very curious and looking forward to Hogwarts, but he was not nervous or confused. On the one hand, he is not a real child after all, and on the other hand, he has experienced time travel, rebirth, soul-splitting, and escape fighting. His heart is much calmer than that of a normal adult. About 2 minutes later, the number of little wizards in the aisle began to decrease, and George took the 3 little ones out of the box and walked slowly out of the car door. "Follow me and don't go over to the upperclassmen." "George, to be honest, you sometimes feel like my dad to me, very reliable." Ginny couldn't help but said as she followed George. "Yeah, he's more reliable than my dad." Thinking of her father Arthur's sometimes unreliable behavior, she added another sentence. Colin and Luna nodded in agreement. Although they had only known each other for less than a day, George had left a very reliable image on them. He speaks calmly and rarely shows surprise for anything. He helps them carry their luggage up and down, wipes their faces when they get dirty from eating snacks, and gets up to cover them with wizard robes when they are sleepy in the afternoon. "Even when I got off the car, I felt like an adult was around and that as long as I obeyed, I would be safe." George also smiled when he heard this. In fact, his behaviors were just behaviors that adults would do subconsciously when they see children, especially children who are not annoying. His body in this world is that of a child, but if you want him to keep pretending to be a child, that is really not easy, so he didn't think it was necessary. Given his background in this world, it was normal for him to mature earlier. This was not a bad thing. "Freshmen. Freshmen, come over here." Not just then, a familiar voice sounded. George turned his head and looked, and it was Hagrid, the gamekeeper, standing on the side of the station holding a magic lantern, shouting loudly. Even though there were hundreds of students at the station at this time, Hagrid's height of 3 to 4 meters still stood out and it was difficult to miss. "Follow me." After turning around and giving instructions, George inserted himself into the dense crowd like a sharp knife, easily pushing aside the senior wizards in front of him, and quickly arrived at Hagrid's side. In terms of strength, even a 7th grade wizard is far behind him. "We meet again, little boss." Seeing George, Hagrid immediately bent down and said hello. He still had fresh memories of the little wizard boss who lived in Nocturne Alley and sold him potions at a discount. "Hello, Hagrid." George also smiled and nodded. "You know Hagrid, why does he call you little boss?" Ginny lay next to George's ear and asked curiously. She had never met Hagrid, but she often heard her brother Ron mention it, so she guessed his identity. "My adoptive father ran a potion shop. He passed away unexpectedly some time ago. Hagrid came to buy potions." George replied casually. "Sorry, I shouldn't have asked. I hope you won't feel sad." Hearing what George said, Ginny's expression immediately turned guilty, while Luna and Colin also had sympathetic looks on their faces. "It doesn't matter." George smiled. He wanted to say that he killed the old guy with his own hands, but he knew that saying so would definitely frighten the 3 little guys. After staying next to Hagrid for a while, the first-year wizards soon arrived, about 30 people in total. In fact, there are not many students in Hogwarts. Normally, there are about 300 students. There are about 40 students in a grade. When there are many students, there are more than 40 students, and when there are few students, there are more than 30 students. It's normal when you think about it. After all, there are not many teachers in the college. Just like the Defense Against the Dark Arts class, which is taught by all 7 grades, but there is actually only one teacher teaching it. If there are too many people, it is impossible to teach it. After everyone arrived, Hagrid led everyone through a narrow path to the Black Lake. Then as usual, he asked everyone to take a boat to the castle in groups of 4. This is a traditional ceremony necessary for the first-grade admission every year. The purpose seems to be to commemorate the 4 legendary wizards who founded Hogwarts. Most of the people who were familiar with each other on the train sat together. Naturally, George took Luna, Ginny and Colin to sit on a boat. However, these ships are not ordinary ships, but ships with special magic spells attached through alchemy. They do not need oars to row, and can automatically generate wind to drive the ship forward. To be honest, the process of entering Hogwarts Castle from the Black Lake by boat was a bit shocking. Even George couldn't help but sigh a little when he looked up and saw the towering castle. One of the young wizards was so shocked that he accidentally fell into the lake halfway, but there was no accident, because as soon as the young wizard fell into the water, a giant octopus rescued him from the lake and put him back on the boat. Don't underestimate this Black Lake. There are many magical creatures living in it. Crossing the Black Lake, going ashore from the underground dock of the castle, and following the tunnel between the rocks to the castle gate, Hagrid handed them over to a tall black-haired witch in an emerald green robe, this which was none other than the Professor of Transfiguration, the headmaster of Gryffindor, Minerva McGonagall. Welcome to Hogwarts. The opening banquet is about to begin, but before you take your seat in the auditorium, you must first determine which college you will enter. Professor McGonagall took them to a small house on the left side of the hall on the first floor of the castle and briefly introduced the 4 colleges and the very important college cup to them. After Professor McGonagall left, the young wizards began to buzz and talk, and the topic was naturally about the sorting ceremony. George was no exception to this, because at this moment he was also thinking about which college he would be sorted into. He was not Harry Potter, the sorting hat would not waste time for him, nor would it send him to any college he wanted to go to. He would be directly assigned according to the results of the magic test like other little wizards, but it didn't matter. In his opinion, all colleges were the same and had their own advantages, because no matter which college he went to, he would become the best and most dazzling one. From today on, Hogwarts will welcome the most powerful and gifted wizard genius in history, and that is George. Chapter 28 The King of Rolls is about to be born. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Is George's body considered a genius in this world? Naturally, it doesn't count. Whether it's memory or understanding, they are actually very average. On the contrary, his body and Marvel's original body, because he inherited Professor X's genes, is really a genius in terms of memory and understanding. If it was just like this, he would naturally not have the confidence to become the most powerful and talented student in the entire history of Hogwarts. His confidence mainly comes from 2 points. The first point is that he does not only have one brain, he only has one will. But now that he is able to skillfully operate 2 bodies, it is actually equivalent to being able to operate 2 brains at the same time for memory, analysis and understanding. For example, when his clone in the Harry Potter world saw a calculation problem, if he just used the clone to calculate it, it might take him 20 seconds to figure it out mentally. If the main world body is awakened at the same time and joins the calculation, and the 2 brains work together, it may not take 10 seconds to calculate the result mentally. In the same way, when he was researching and learning a magic, 2 brains learning together was much better than 1 brain. At that time, he was already comparable to some top geniuses. For this reason, he also specially changed the work and rest time of the main world. In the future, the clone will go to class during the day, and the main body will also act as a second brain in the Marvel world at night to assist in improving learning efficiency, and then catch up on sleep during the day. Secondly, he did something else in the days before school started. That is to use the supercomputer in the basement of the Mutant Academy to record all the books and textbooks he has read in the Harry Potter world into the computer. He also doesn't plan to let go of all the knowledge points from later classes and the books in the school library. The 2 brains were loaded and working together, turning him into a top genius, but he couldn't forget anything, not to mention him. Even the top wizards and legendary wizards in the wizarding world cannot remember every word in every book they have read, but it's different now. All the content is input into the supercomputer. As long as he searches for keywords, the relevant information can jump out immediately. So in the next course, when faced with all the teacher's questions, if he can't remember clearly, he can use the supercomputer to search and get the answers quickly, thereby getting all the points. In the exam, as long as it involves theoretical knowledge, it is no different from an open book exam. In the next 7 years, he will trick all the little wizards to death, including the famous academic master Hermione, and it is impossible to beat him. As for why? Of course, it is to get more resources and better magic. Only those who are good enough can have more privileges. If Hermione hadn't been good enough, how could she have gotten the Time Turner? If Voldemort hadn't been good enough, how could he have been admired by so many wizards, favored by teachers, and learned so many powerful black magics, so he also has to be excellent, excellent in all aspects, preferably so good that even Dumbledore doubts that he is the savior who can save the world, although that possibility is relatively small, you tell me, how can they accurately assign us to which college? It couldn't be that I passed some kind of test. I didn't read anything except a lot of history of magic. Colin's expression was vaguely uneasy. Young wizard born into a Muggle family basically has no foundation in magic. If he were tested in this area, he would really know nothing. Ron told me it was a scary test, but I didn't believe how the school could do something dangerous to students. If it was, I don't think Ron would have passed the test. Ginny looked like she didn't care about any test. She thought she was much better than Ron's timid brother. Luna still looked so erratic. Although Dad didn't tell me the specific method of sorting into colleges, he said that the whole process is very simple, and we will be sorted into the college that suits us best, so don't worry. That's it, that's good. Which college are you going to? Colin was relieved when he heard this, and then became a little excited. I want to go to Gryffindor. Harry Potter is in Gryffindor, and it is said that the greatest wizard Dumbledore is also from Gryffindor. I also want to go to Gryffindor. My brothers are all Gryffindors. Ginny replied with a slight blush. In fact, the more important reason is that her favorite Harry Potter is in Gryffindor. It will be all right. Luna and George said at the same time. Ah! At this moment, a scream suddenly came from the hut. It turned out that a group of ghosts appeared through the wall, scaring the little wizards. The ghosts laughed and commented on the little wizards. After seeing Professor McGonagall appear, they dispersed and disappeared. Now, get in single file and follow me. Professor McGonagall said with a serious expression, then carried the little wizards out of the hut and walked towards the auditorium on the other side of the hall. It's really magnificent. As the team entered the auditorium, George's eyes also lit up. The first thing that caught his eye was the thousands of magic candles floating in mid-air, and then the beautiful virtual starry sky scene on the ceiling presented by magic. There are 4 long seats below, each one represents a college, and each one is filled with 6 grades of wizards. There were golden plates and goblets on the table. There was another long table on the table opposite, where all the teachers of the school Saturday. The oldest and most eye-catching person in the middle should be Dumbledore, and Flitwick, Sprout, Lockhart and others sat on both sides. However, he did not see Professor Snape, the Dean of Slytherin. After careful recollection, he remembered that the professor should be patrolling the castle at this time to arrest Harry and Ron, who had been in the news, because Dobby, the house elf of the Malfoy family, was worried that Harry would encounter the danger brought by Voldemort's diary when he came to Hogwarts this year. He closed the entrance when Harry and Ron entered the 9 3/4 station. The two missed the Hogwarts Express and had to drive Arthur's privately modified magic car to Hogwarts. However, due to Ron's unskilled driving skills, he forgot to be invisible when he took off at the beginning, and many Muggles witnessed the magical scene of the car flying in the air, which was also reported in the Daily Prophet. At this moment, it is estimated that the two have arrived at the school, but they just didn't catch up with the sorting ceremony. He turned his head and looked at the windows around the Great Hall. Sure enough, at a window, he saw 2 boys looking inside, but they were quickly pulled out by a pair of big hands. Poor 2 little guys, 2 seconds of silence for you. Harry and Ron were caught on the spot by Snape, and it was estimated that the next step would be bad, because Lily was Harry's mother. Snape would protect Harry even if he sacrificed his own life, but because James was Harry's father, Snape also hated Harry from the bottom of his heart. Chapter 29 Sorting Ceremony. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. There was a 4-legged stool in front of the long table on the stage, and on the stool was a patched, historical, pointed wizard hat. The pointed wizard hat was singing a song by itself until Professor McGonagall came forward. Whoever's name I call now, put on the hat, sit on the stool, and wait for the sorting. Professor McGonagall took out a parchment roll. Colin Creevey. Colin was startled, and immediately trotted up, sat down nervously and put on the hat. Almost without a pause, the hat gave the answer. Gryffindor. All the wizards at the long table of Gryffindor applauded, celebrating that their college had a new student. Astoria Greengrass. Slytherin. Luna Lovegood. Ravenclaw. Ginny Weasley. Gryffindor. As the little wizards were called up one by one, it was soon George's turn. George, the moment George put on the sorting hat, like other little wizards, he didn't hear any hesitation or questioning from the sorting hat, and got the answer directly. Slytherin. It's Slytherin. George showed a little surprise on his face, but he quickly restrained his emotions, put down the sorting hat, and walked slowly to the Slytherin table and sat down. To be honest, he thought he was most likely Gryffindor, and a little Ravenclaw, but he didn't expect it to be Slytherin. But after thinking about it, he likes to have plans and clear goals when doing things, and sometimes he is more realistic, which is in line with some characteristics of Slytherin. Maybe he really prefers Slytherin's personality characteristics in his bones. Slytherin does not mean bad, and none of the 4 major colleges refers to absolutely good or absolutely bad. Gryffindor has also produced some wizards like Pettigrew, and Slytherin has also produced wizards like Regulus who are willing to sacrifice themselves to resist Voldemort, and even prefer to die rather than let the house elves replace them. The characteristics of the 4 major colleges are actually mostly positive. Gryffindor is brave, Ravenclaw is knowledgeable, Hufflepuff is upright, and Slytherin is smart, motivated and goal-oriented. Slytherin is also okay. Snape is more protective and proficient in dark magic. If he can win honor for Slytherin, he should have a lot of gains. When he came to his senses, the sorting ceremony was over. In fact, before that, for each college he might be assigned to, he analyzed the personality of each dean and made relevant response plans. Therefore, even if it was Slytherin, it would not be a big problem. Dumbledore said a few simple words, introduced the new defense against the dark arts Professor Gilderoy Lockhart, and announced the start of the dinner. Then, countless delicacies made by house elves appeared on the 4 long tables. In an instant, and the hungry little wizards immediately began to show off. George also ate the food on the table, but he still paid some attention to the long table in front of the stage. Sure enough, not long after, a wizard with a thin figure, grayish-yellow skin, a hooked nose, greasy black hair draped over his shoulders, wearing a black robe and cloak, and exuding a cold aura appeared at the door of the auditorium. He walked quickly to the long table like a big bat, and all the little wizards he passed by, no matter which college or grade, couldn't help holding their breath. This person was none other than the Dean of Slytherin, Severus Snape, the top potion master, and a magic master second only to Dumbledore, Voldemort and Grindelwald. Snape said a few words to Dumbledore and McGonagall, and Professor McGonagall's face quickly turned ugly, and then the 3 of them walked out of the hall together. My father got promoted again in the Ministry of Magic. When I was 7, my mother bought me a sword worth 20 galleons. Humph, what's yours, me? At the Slytherin table, the first-year wizards began to show off their families and financial resources while eating. The little wizards who can be assigned to Slytherin are basically descendants of pure-blood families. Very few are mixed blood, and it is basically unlikely that there are little wizards born in pure Muggle families, so some of them knew each other when they were young. Even if they didn't know each other, they would deliberately show their families and financial resources at this time to ensure their next position. George didn't get involved. It is very likely that his body is a mixed blood. His Muggle mother had a relationship with his wizard father, and then got pregnant unexpectedly. When he couldn't find the father, he didn't want to drag himself down, and it was normal to abandon the child after giving birth, so in terms of family status, he must be at the bottom of Slytherin, so there is no need to ask for trouble. As a half-blood, as long as he shows absolute strength like Snape and Voldemort, he will naturally not lack status and admirers. Slytherin pays attention to bloodline and strength. Of course you have to be at least a half-blood. Oh, Merlin's beard, it's the Bloody Baron. He looks so scary, that at this moment, the little wizard shuddered, because a scary ghost with a thin face, empty eyes, and covered in blood suddenly came to the Slytherin table and sat down, and the place where he sat was right next to George. George looked up at the Bloody Baron, a faint smile appeared on his face, he nodded to the Bloody Baron gracefully, as a greeting, and then continued to eat dinner leisurely. What's the big deal about being covered in blood? He has seen everything in the laboratory and killed dozens of people. How could he be afraid of this little blood? And the Bloody Baron was obviously a little surprised that someone could be so calm when seeing a first-year wizard for the first time. However, as a Slytherin ghost, he was quite satisfied that Slytherin had such a courageous little wizard, so he also nodded in response. Which family is he from? How dare he say hello to the Bloody Baron? I don't know. I haven't heard of him. He should be a half-blood. Half-blood? But he doesn't look like one. I think he looks like a wizard from one of the 28 families. He looks very elegant. George's performance in front of the Bloody Baron naturally caught the attention of all the Slytherin wizards. They were also curious about this elegant and bold little wizard, however, they soon concluded that George was a half-blood, because if he was pure blood, they would not have heard of him. His name, George, was also very strange, but even so, some little wizards, especially the little witches in the first and second grades, developed a little affection for George. This also made some little wizards look at George with a little more jealousy. Chapter 30: A Show of Strength. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Draco, he performed much better than you did last year. A short-haired little witch in the second grade seat at the Slytherin long table teased the blonde boy sitting opposite. The boy's expression immediately became unhappy. What is he? He is just a half-blood. Let me tell you, I will be the team seeker this year and help Slytherin win the House Cup. Last year, the Bloody Baron sat next to him. He scared him half to death that year and became a big stain in his life. Draco, are you really going to join the team? Hearing the news that Draco was going to join the team, the attention of the little wizards was immediately attracted. You know, there are almost few wizards who don't like the sport of Quidditch, and the annual Quidditch game is also the most concerned thing for everyone. Of course, my skills are much better than that stupid Potter, he is just lucky. Malfoy said proudly. In fact, his father sold a lot of things in Knockturn Alley, and used the money to replace the entire Slytherin Quidditch team with the latest Nimbus 2001, so this opportunity came. When the banquet was about to end, Dumbledore, Snape and McGonagall rushed back. Dumbledore talked about some precautions and ended the opening dinner with a collective singing of the school song. First-year students, follow me. At this time, the fifth-year prefects on the four long tables stood up almost at the same time. The first-year students of the four colleges also stood up and followed the prefects of their respective colleges to their dormitories. Leaving the hall and coming to the lobby on the first floor, the four colleges began to separate. The little wizards of Gryffindor and Ravenclaw climbed the marble stairs to the upper floor of the castle, while the little wizards of Slytherin and Hufflepuff went to the basement of the castle. The Slytherin dormitory is even lower than the Hufflepuff dormitory. Let me tell you, of the four dormitories in the school, our Slytherin dormitory is the best, because you can directly see the underwater world of the Black Lake and the magical creatures living in the Black Lake from the dormitory and the lounge. The fifth-year prefect walking in front saw that the Slytherin wizards had a strange expression because of the cold and dark basement, so he immediately raised his head and proudly introduced them. When the wizards heard that they could see the magical creatures under the Black Lake in the dormitory, they immediately showed surprise, because they were impressed by the big octopus that saved people when they took a boat across the Black Lake. Pure blood. Walking to a wall at the end of the basement, the prefect shouted a command loudly, and the wall immediately cracked, revealing a large room covered in green, which was the Slytherin common room. The password of the common room is changed every 2 weeks, and the new password will be notified on the bulletin board. The prefect introduced when he took the wizards into the lounge. At this time, the attention of the wizards was completely attracted by the scene in the lounge. Gorgeous decorations, exquisitely carved furniture, and the beautiful Black Lake view outside the transparent glass instantly diluted the darkness of the dungeon. The most magical thing is the medieval tapestry hanging on the wall, which depicts various famous adventures of the Slytherins at that time. It's like watching a big movie, and the protagonists in it will greet you from time to time. Look, it's a mermaid just swam over. Okay, you will see these often in the future, don't be too surprised. Now I suggest you go to your respective dormitories to tidy up. Boys are on the left and girls are on the right. Your names are posted on the door of the dormitory. Check in according to your names. The class leader waved his hand with satisfaction, and finally left after a few instructions. It's like living in an aquarium. George looked around the common room, and instead of continuing to visit the common room with other little wizards, he turned and walked towards the boys' dormitory. Soon he found his name at the door of a room, and there were 3 other names next to his name, which meant that he had 3 roommates. Baron Belanta, Ivy Thorn, Cesar Burke. It seems that they are not famous families. After a quick glance, he didn't care and pushed the door and walked into the dormitory. Like the common room, there are many transparent glass in the dormitory, so you can see the scenery of the lake bottom outside. It seems that you are not hungry either. On the bedside table closest to the door, George saw a page feasting in the cage. It was obvious that the house elf responsible for transporting the luggage did not treat the pets of the little wizards badly and also prepared a sumptuous dinner. Coo. Page happily responded when he found George appeared, and continued to work hard. After packing his luggage, George sat on the soft bed and began to read the magic book. In fact, he read so hard to learn magic, not only to improve his strength and protect himself, but also because he really likes magic in his heart, thinking about the things that only existed in illusions in his previous life. They actually appeared in front of him, and he could master this magical power. How could he not indulge in it? To be honest, in all the years of his previous life, there was nothing that made him so obsessed. If the body did not need enough sleep to learn magic better, he could even give up sleep and study and learn the magical power of magic 24 hours a day. Sometimes he also had the idea that this kind of life might be the life he wanted, instead of going to get off work like a robot every day, wearing a mask to entertain leaders, colleagues and customers every day, and then slowly aging, turning into a handful of ashes and being buried in the cemetery by future generations. When he thought back to his life, there was nothing worth lingering on. That lowly mermaid dared to scare me through the glass. When I learn powerful black magic in the future, I must let her taste my power. Of course, we are the most noble wizards, and we are pure blood. We will definitely become big names in the wizarding world in the future. About half an hour later, the 3 little wizards chattered and walked into the dormitory. When they saw George and the huge page next to him, they were also shocked. Even they rarely saw owls as big as Paige, and their pet owls were only a little bigger than the palm. "Hey, kid, are you George Joe?" "Call me George, or Joe." George replied without raising his head. The 3 looked at each other, and one of the strongest-looking little wizards raised his neck and said, "I like your bed, now take your luggage to the innermost bed." The fathers of the 3 of them all worked in the Ministry of Magic, and they knew each other since childhood. After discovering that the last person in the dormitory was a half-blood who had attracted some attention at the dinner party, they decided to come in and teach him a lesson. So they didn't really like George's bed, but just wanted to give George a warning, so that he would know that they were the protagonists in this dormitory or in the first-year Slytherin college.